Let's talk about this criticism of The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. As the vast majority of you probably know, Babel by R.F. Kuang is one of my favorite books, if not my favorite book of all time. But I'm frankly not the biggest fan of the rest of her work to date. That includes The Poppy War. I think I gave the trilogy overall a 6.5 out of 10, and this book, The Poppy War, a 7 out of 10. Despite that, I don't think this criticism of The Poppy War is a fair criticism. In short, I've heard a few people criticize The Poppy War for having too much of a switch halfway through the book, where the story quite suddenly shifts from being dark academia to a completely different story about a war. But that's a feature of the story, it's not a bug. R.F. Kuang has talked about how this was based on conversations she had with people who had actually experienced war, where they were just children at a school one day and then soldiers in a war the next. And that's not a unique experience, it's a pretty common experience that people have had during war. One of the central themes explored in this first book of the trilogy was how suddenly and completely people's lives are upended by war. So of course that tone shift is a feature of the story, it's not a bug. It's not a flaw, and I don't think it's fair to criticize the book for dealing with that theme. It's kind of like criticizing a book for killing off a character where one of the central themes of the book is dealing with that character's death. It doesn't make any sense. You can say that you were reading the book for dark academia and then it ended up being something different, and I think that's fair. But to describe this shift in the story as a flaw is itself flawed. I think a part of what plays into this critique is this concept of promises and payoffs. I'm sure he didn't coin the term, but Brandon Sanderson is the author I've seen talk most frequently about this concept. And the basic concept is the early things you talk about in your book, the early things you show, the promises you make to the reader have to eventually pay off. Otherwise, the reader will be left unsatisfied. And the most common example Brandon Sanderson gives to illustrate this phenomenon is the prologue of The Wheel of Time, which is very dark. He talks about how that shows that the tone of the Wheel of Time story overall is going to be pretty dark. So it starts off in the first few chapters as more lighthearted. But I don't think every book has to be structured that way. Again, where one of the central themes of the book is the sudden upending of people's lives, I think it's completely fair to have a complete tone and plot shift halfway through the book. Again, it's a feature, not a bug. But yeah, let me know what you guys think, and as always, drop a follow and go subscribe on YouTube or else.